Everyone likes a good Christmas tale, especially one that is true. Join us in 1952, the nation's first Christmas under its new monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, for a tale of bravery and rescue. The Monday before Christmas, a storm raged off the west coast of Scotland, and the Margarita, a Finnish cargo ship heading for Glasgow with a cargo of iron ore, had run aground. Campbeltown Lifeboat was one of the 2 RNLI boats sent to her aid. Now remember, this was 70 years ago. The 51-foot Barnett-class lifeboat stationed in the town since 1929 had an open aft cockpit, with a shelter ahead giving access to the engine room. There was a forward shelter ahead of the mast. The crew's only other protection from the elements were their sou'westers and oilskins, with life jackets over the top. Christmas Day did not become a public holiday in Scotland until 1958, and 70 years ago no newspaper in the land was going to miss a day's sales because of the holiday. For the Campbeltown Courier's reporters and printers, it was business as usual on Thursday, December 25th, 1952, as they got the latest edition of the Campbeltown Courier out on the street. So, put your tuppence halfpenny down at the counter of Keith's the newsagents on Main Street, and read all about the city of Glasgow with her crew under the command of coxswain Duncan Newlands. The headline proudly stated, "Finnish steamer ashore on the Craig. Lifeboats and tugs stand by as master refuses to abandon ship. Crew including 1 woman brought to Campbeltown on Monday night." Campbeltown and Girvan lifeboats stood by the 2,791-ton Finnish steamer Margarita, which ran aground on the rocky south side of Ailsa Craig during a south-southwest gale early on Monday morning. The Margarita, owned by the Nordstrom and Company, Finland, was on a passage from Alexandria to the Clyde and had called at Turkey, where she had loaded with a consignment of iron ore to be discharged at Rothesay Dock, Glasgow. But she did not get past the Craig. Her bows came up against the rocks and tore a large gash in the forepeak of number 1 hold, which filled up with 400 to 500 tons of seawater. She radioed distress, and Port Patrick Coast Guard Station set rescue operations a-going. Officers at this station reported that the vessel was leaking, a statement which was further confirmed by the master at 8 a.m, for the following message was received by Port Patrick radio station, according to Lloyd's. "Water rising in forehold. Ship's pumps cannot keep it. Salvage boat needed. Southeast storm. Fear for breaking." The Girvan lifeboat was called out shortly after 5 a.m, in heavy seas, and with a strong southeast wind blowing. Meantime, the salvage ship Salveda, operated by Metal Industries Limited, Faslane, with Mr. James Robertson, the salvage officer in charge, proceeded to the vicinity. The captain of the Margarita signalled that he was taking in water in number 1 hold forward, and that the forepeak was flooded, but that both he and the crew intended to stay on board. He asked for the assistance of a tug. Arran Coastguards got in touch with Greenock. The Clyde tugs, Brigadier and Warrior, arrived. Rain squalls blew up, and the wind became menacing. Later, Campbeltown Lifeboat proceeded to give assistance, owing to the anxious reports from the vessel and the deterioration of the weather. The Margarita was lying bows hard on under a sheer quarry face of rock when the Campbeltown Lifeboat, City of Glasgow, came in on her port side and took off 11 members of the crew, including 1 woman, 61-year-old Mrs. Olga Gustafsson of Abo, Kaskasgata, Finland, wife of the chief engineer. The lifeboat also brought to the new quay a considerable quantity of luggage which came ashore under the careful scrutiny of customs officers. The survivors were taken away in a private bus to a local hotel, where they were accommodated and given all hospitality. After refuelling, the Campbeltown lifeboat returned to keep an all-night vigil beside the ship, and to relieve the Girvan lifeboat, which returned around midnight to Girvan to refuel, and to bring back provisions for the LSA party on the Craig, the lifeboat having early discharged life-saving apparatus for use if required. During the time, the tugs Brigadier and Warrior each got a hawser connected with the ship and remained like dogs at the leash throughout the evening on Monday, but later it was decided that the Warrior could return to base and that the hawser could be slipped from the Brigadier also, but that this tug should stand by some distance away as a precaution. On Monday night, the master of the ship reaffirmed his earlier decision to stay on board. From the starboard windows of the 32-seater Pioneer aircraft, Mrs. Olga Gustafsson and the other 10 members of the crew saw their stricken ship in the distant haze on Tuesday afternoon. After spending the night comfortably in a Campbeltown hotel, these survivors went by the usual plane service from Campbeltown to Glasgow to be taken under the care of the Finnish consul in Glasgow. None of them could speak any language other than Finnish, and no one in Campbeltown could understand a word they said, and it was only by gestures that they were able to make themselves understood. All day their ship remained fast, bows in the rocks on the south side of the island. The salvage ship Salveda was given instruction to take charge of the salvage operations. She proceeded from Lamlash Bay, Arran, where she had remained overnight to Ayr, where she took on extra hands and discharging gear, and on Tuesday afternoon she commenced the difficult operation of jettisoning the cargo of the iron ore from the flooded forward hold and from the adjacent hold. A salvage officer of considerable experience is aboard the Salveda. A spokesman in charge of the work said that the forward hold was completely tidal. The Campbeltown and Girvan lifeboats relieved each other for rest and meals during the day. The Ballantrae life-saving volunteers on Ailsa Craig were given rations from Girvan by the lifeboat. They connected a breeches buoy to the ship and were standing ready to man this rescue gear should conditions make it necessary. Squarely built, rugged 56-year-old Captain J. Sundell, 4 Jungfestag, Helsingfors, Finland, master of the Margarita, said yesterday morning when he was landed with 18 of his crew and a salvage party of 14 by Campbeltown lifeboat that this was the worst Christmas Eve in his life. He carefully folded his fur-collared grey greatcoat, put a cigarette in his holder, and lit it. "My wife lives in Helsingfors, where my only son is a doctor of medicine," he said, laying down his leather satchel full of ship's papers on the bed of his hotel room. "I have been married 28 years, and I've only ever spent 4 Christmases at home. The sea is a dog's life, but I love it. Yes, this is my worst Christmas. We had come from Turkey with 4,100 tons of iron ore, and then got so near our journey's end, we came to grief. It is tragic, and I am a sad man. This is my first sea shipwreck in the 35 years I have been at sea. The weather was dirty, and there was a sudden squall when we ran aground. What extent the damage is, I cannot say. It is all under the cargo in number 1 hold. 7,100 tons of cargo were dumped overboard last night and during the afternoon. How did I spend the time? Walking about. I could not sleep. I could not concentrate to read a book. I had to concentrate on my ship. The swell was rising last night, the ship shuddering and creaking. I felt it was unwise for us to remain aboard, but all the time I kept saying to myself, I will never abandon her. I shall return to my ship as soon as possible, but it all depends on the salvage men and the weather. I hope I shall be able to spend Christmas back on my ship." Captain Sundell said that his ship ran aground at 4:30 a.m. on Monday. The afterdeck of his ship was awash when the last remaining 18 survivors abandoned ship with the 14 of a salvage party. They jumped from the deck to the lifeboat. It was only a jump of a few feet, with the lifeboat heaving up to meet the deck. All wore life jackets, and there were no casualties. Captain Sundell was last to leave his ship. He stood for a moment or two gazing sadly at her, and then turned and followed his men to the lifeboat. Coxswain Duncan Newlands and his lifeboat men had been at sea for 36 hours without sleep. Head of the salvage party was Mr. Murray Taylor, General Manager of the Metal Industries Salvage Limited, a well-known marine salvage expert. The salvage ship Salveda escorted the lifeboat into Campbeltown Loch. Around the Margarita, alone, a derelict, there were pounding seas and a howling gale. The Margarita was successfully refloated on December the 29th. The story of the Margarita and the bravery of those who came to her aid has all but passed from living memory. Perhaps a few older people can recall that their parents or grandparents were involved. The events live on in the archives here at Wyvex Media. like so many other stories. Did you know that as part of the registration of each newspaper in the United Kingdom, it is obliged by law since 1869 to send a copy of every edition to the British Museum? There we all are, for posterity. Each Oban Saints match, Highland Games, Community Council meeting, school prize giving, and fancy dress fundraising, cattle market prices from Tiree to Oban, and on to Fort William. Welcome to your place in history, and happy Christmas from us all. Finnish steamer Ashore on the Craig was researched, written and edited by Joanne Simms. The narrator was Stephen Day. It was a Wyvex Media production for the Oban Times, LochaberTimes, Campbeltown Courier, Argyllshire Advertiser and the Arran Banner.